Namaste. We're not going to show you the pictures, but we're not going to read the little writing out on the pictures. Eventually, we'll put, hopefully, when put pictures like this that are important, links in the description below. But I don't know when that'll be. But we'll just show the pictures, but we won't do the writing. It changes the font and different things. Yeah. Tapestry, plainly woven pictures. Tapestry weaving dates back to ancient Egypt. And there's some of us that love Egypt, because every time Egypt comes up, there's a massive grin comes on our face. And is a method of weaving patterns or pictures using plain weave. So the weft covers the warp. The weft being placed in small sections, not salvage to salvage. It can be worked on many different looms. Various methods for joining two areas or colours are shown opposite. In the Middle Ages in France, Holland, Spain, and Italy, tapestry reached its peak as a mural art and was used in convents, churches, and castles to provide warmth. The word originates from tapis, T-A-P-I-S, French for carpet. Notable tapestries were produced by large studios and later designed by artists, creating ornate woven surfaces like paintings. A full-sized drawing or cartoon is transferred with chalk or ink onto the warp, which must be strong and is traditionally of wool. The design is worked sideways, so the tapestry hangs finely from its weft threads, which give it strength. The picture is worked from the back, using a mirror to view the front. Linen was used to create the whites of eyes. The tapestry techniques has also long been used in Asia, Peru, and America to create items other than wall hangings. One type of rug known as a kilim, from the Arabic kalim, meaning carpet, used a tapestry technique. A kilim is made of stepped diagonal patterns characterized by short vertical slits appearing where two colors meet on adjacent warps. They are double-sided and flexible, and were also used as bed coverings or door hangings. The original magic carpet was probably a kilim. The horizontal loom, also known as the ground loom. This loom was in use in Catalhayuk in 6000 BC and is still employed by Bedouin tribes for its ease of use. It is worked lying flat on the ground and can be unpegged and rolled as tribes move on. The maximum width of fabric produced on a horizontal loom is about 3.5 feet, and the Egyptians used it to weave the finest linen prior to their use of the vertical loom. Fine knotted rugs can also be created on it, and rich designs by the use of patterned sticks which lift the warps. It was on this type of loom that Delilah wove 7 locks of Samson's hair to trap him while he slept. When his enemies came, he pulled it from the ground with his great strength, and it was only when she shaved his hair off that he was defeated. Hair possesses great power. In Malory's Le Morte d'Arthur, Dindrain, who lives in a chaste life, weaves a girdle from her own hair for Galahad to wear to carry Solomon's sword. Like Samson, Hercules was enslaved by a woman. Omphale, the queen of Libya, she forced him to wear women's clothes and made him weave and spin. Hercules also travelled with Jason and the Argonauts in their quest for the Golden Fleece, which hung in the grove of Mars in the kingdom of Colchis, guarded by a sleepless dragon. In the myth of Amor and Psyche, Psyche is given the task of collecting golden wool from vicious rams. Advised by a reed, she waits until they sleep and collects wool left on twigs by the light of the moon. The ram also denotes the astrological sign of Aries, ruled by Mars, marking the spring equinox when night and day are equal. Fleece has been endowed with power since Mesopotamian times, used in religious rites as a cure and possibly for collecting gold dust from running streams. Rugs and knots, loose ends and warm, fluffy softness. The oldest rug known is the ornately decorated Pazirek rug, found frozen in a grave in Siberia and estimated to be 2,500 years old. It is now in the Hermitage Museum, Leningrad. This rug used the Gyords, or Turkish knot, which creates strong, firm rugs. The other main knotting technique is the Sena, or Persian knot, which gives a flexible pile. Both are named after weaving regions. Many rugs use cotton as a warp for its smoothness and resistance to stretching. With a weft of sheep's wool, goat or camel hair, or luxurious silk. In India, silk rugs could contain up to 2,000 knots per square inch. Spain was the first Western country to learn these Eastern techniques, which then spread to Portugal, England, and France. The Spanish used a knot worked on a single warp, called the Spanish knot. All these knotting techniques are then held in place by 2 or 3 rows of plain weave before another row of knotting. In Scandinavia, rear rugs were produced using a version of the Gjorde knot to create a double-sided pile fabric. Due to their warmth, the rugs were used by fishermen and as a bed covering. Brides had them as a part of their dowry and were married standing on them. In the tale, 1,001 Nights, a seemingly worthless rug, simply by the power of wishing, becomes a magical flying carpet, able to transport the wisher. In another tale, a weaver beats all other craftsmen and is honoured as the sheikha of sheiks because he is able to teach a prince his trade in an hour. Islamic tradition says Solomon had a carpet that could transport him and his men. Rugs and symbolism. Flying your magic carpet. Oriental rugs are a microcosm within the macrocosm, consisting of an inner, seemingly infinite field surrounded by an outer border divided into multiple stripes. They are woven on the simple horizontal or vertical looms and can take months or years to complete. Each rug possesses an imperfection in its symmetrical lines or pattern, as only Allah can be perfect. Arab tribes use these carpets to create a personal space during their nomadic wanderings and to protect them from evil. Blue beads or shells along a rug's edges protect the weaver from envy, while long threads extending from the edges allow evil spirits to leave. A rosette surrounded by 2 elongated leaves is often interpreted as the world surrounded by water around which 2 fishes swim, to create day and night and the seasons. The boter, or almond nut, also known as the Paisley pine for its use on shawls, is a common pattern on rugs. Its shape can be traced back to Babylon, where it represented the growing shoot of a date palm, and from that came to be regarded as the tree of life. Prayer rugs protect the devout Muslim from the ground and are recognized by the arch at one end, which is the mihrab, or prayer niche. This is oriented towards Mecca for the 5 daily prayers. The Lady Fatima, we used to get called that a lot in Morocco, daughter of Mohammed, was a weaver of knots. Saturn times, restriction, contraction. And her hand is sometimes seen on rugs. Chinese rugs were produced in organized workshops, incorporating many Taoist and Buddhist symbols, such as the lotus, the flute, and the fan. The Tibetans produced unusual tiger rugs, used to act as guardians and to indicate status. Weaving drafts, coding for patterns. Weaving drafts are the patterns that a weaver follows to create a fabric on a loom with 2, 4, or more shafts. They simply show where warp ends are passed through one of the heddles on one of the 4 shafts. A heddle is a wire with an eye at the center through which the warp passes. Each shaft is connected to a pedal, or sometimes to more than one. When that pedal is operated, those shafts sink or rise on the countermarch and jack looms, and the weft can then be passed through. As weaving progresses and the fabric is cut off the loom, the weaver may be reminded of the stages of life leading to death. The warp represents the constant forces of the world, while the weft passing back and forth recalls the transient affairs of man. The warp also represents the active masculine and the direct light of the sun, while the weft sings of the passive feminine and the reflected light of the moon. The Dogon people of Africa believe their ancestor spirit gave them weaving by pulling threads between his sharpened teeth. The opening of his mouth gave the shed to weave through, and the threads also bestowed the power of speech. Weaving was not permitted at night because it was believed to weave silence and darkness into the cloth. In Chinese legend, the weaver girl, the star Vega, fell in love with the cowherd, the star Altar, and they had 2 children. But the jealous celestial queen mother separated them, running her hairpin across the sky to form the Milky Way, called the Silver River by the Chinese. On the 7th day of the 7th moon, magpies from a bridge to the 2 lovers can meet. In Japan, this is celebrated in the Tanabata festival. Oh, it's beautiful. Table and treadle looms of heddles, treadles, shafts, and shuttles. The basic process involved in using a rigid heddle, table, or treadle loom are the same. They differ only in size and strength. On all 3, the warping takes time, but the cloth rollers mean that long lengths or several items can be woven each time. The rigid heddle loom is the simplest, producing plain weave. The rigid heddle, traditionally carved from bone, wood, or ivory, spaces the warp and does the shedding and beating. Table looms can have 2, 4, or more shafts, and the sheds are produced by levers, working on the same principle as the treadle loom. Table looms are operated by hand, whereas floor looms have treadles, are operated by hand and foot, and therefore are faster. They appeared in China possibly around 2000 BC, and in Europe 3000 years later. In 13th century Europe, strict regulations governed the length, width, and weight of cloth, and 2-man loom was introduced in Flanders to produce wider cloth. Taoist doctrine states that the movement of the shuttle to and fro represents the alternation between life and death on the cosmic loom. The movement is also seen as a metaphor for copulation. Malay folklore tells of a cloth that weaves itself, each year adding a thread of pearls. When it is finished, the world will end. The draw loom and Jacquard loom. The draw loom enables ornate patterns more complex than those produced on a heddle loom to be woven. Originally, each warp was attached to a cord and individually lifted by an assistant, or drawboy, at the top of the loom. The master weaver threw the shuttle in a process called pulling the flowers. In China, from where its intervention possibly dates back to 400 BC. Its use travelled west, so all European Renaissance and Baroque pattern weaves were created on a version of this loom. It was used in Europe until the end of the 18th century. In 1806, Joseph Marie Jacquard in Lyons, France, invented a loom operated by punched cards to lift the warps in sequence. The loom was fast and could produce complex patterns, often resembling ornate medieval tapestries. French weavers greeted this development with hostility, and Jacquard died in poverty in 1834. But the idea was revolutionary. It directly influenced Charles Babbage in his early computer designs, as it was the earliest use of an information storage system. The complex loom enabled items such as shawls to be produced quickly and cheaply. Previously, cashmere shawls were imported at great expense. Napoleon's wife, Josephine, owned hundreds of these original shawls and is said to have initiated their popularity. Today, these looms have themselves been computerized for even faster and more complex fabric production, a long way from traditional weaving skills, which, passed from mother to daughter, later guaranteed the girl wealth and a husband. Gone too today are many of the initiatory aspects of the art. Perhaps no bad thing. In Venezuela, girls were kept in solitary confinement for years while they learned to weave. Ornamental weaves, lacy gauzes and interlinks. Gauze weaves create lacy fabrics, usually an open work design made with plain weave. If gauze is combined with other weaves, it is known as lino. Gauzes differ from other weaves as the warp is active, crossing itself in areas and then being fixed in place by the weft. Gauze was used in Egypt as early as 2000 BC and also in Peru and China. Sprang, an interlinking technique, creates fine, open, elastic patterns, but is actually a form of plaiting, as it is created only of warp. The name comes from the Old Swedish word sprangning and dates back to 14,000 BC. The warp is twisted around itself from one end, creating a mirror image at the other, and is finally fixed in place at the center. It is worked on a frame with the threads under tension and shortens by 15 to 30% when it is finished. Twining, first used in basket making, dates back at least to 6500 BC in Anatolia. No shedding device is required in this technique, as it is worked on a passive warp. The Maori created ornate geometric patterns called taniko using single or double pair twining. Their most valuable cloaks were sometimes given names and went on to become famous. Their legends tell of how a fairy was tricked by a group of women into weaving in the daytime so they could learn her skills. The Maori also added feathers to create ornate rain capes, while Aztec rulers kept birds captive to supply their weavers, using white chicken feathers for weddings. Japanese folklore tells of the crane wife who weaves beautiful cloth. Her husband spies on her to find out how she produces it, only to discover she is a crane weaving from her own plucked feathers. Once the secret is known, she flies away. Finishing and fringes. All things come to an end. Fringes have been used from Neolithic times to finish off a fabric, to prevent the weft unravelling, and to provide a decorative border. If the fabric is not being woven with forced salvages, as in Navajo weaving, then various fringe, tassel, or stitching techniques can be used. The Maori decorated their cloaks with tassels of white dog hair. The dogs slept indoors to keep their coats clean and were then occasionally shaved to provide hair for several cloaks. Some Native American men wore the fringe of their finger-woven sashes hanging to the left or right to show their marital status. In Indonesia, a circular cloth was made continuously around a loom with a gap left in the weft where the fringes would be. This cloth was left intact, the fringes cut only at important ritual ceremonies. These fringes were then dipped into a sacred spring and the water was sprinkled onto the celebrant. The Batak people of Sumatra, we got on more. Yeah, we've got them made one of them, haven't we? Yeah, that's where we did our jungle trek too. Create a sacred circular cloth called a hiho. Maris to Gutugwa, with the fringe left uncut. The cloth ensures continuity of life from mother to child. It acts as a protector to various generations, its power gaining with time. Starting at one side of the uncut fringe, the cloth represents the growth of the child through life until the other side of the uncut fringe is reached, representing a new generation beginning. Other Batak groups used an uncut circular cloth to encircle a couple at their marriage ceremony to honour the union. Weaving, an act of creation from the very dawn of prehistory, a gift given to all cultures by their gods, still has its power to intrigue and delight. We can still discover the joy of following the path from tangled fibre to thread to woven fabric as generations before have done. Simple looms. Old-fashioned loom, floor loom. Variations on plain weave, variations on twill. fancy weaves, colour effects. And then glossary. Namaste. We're going to go and just read the introduction of Bruce Lipton, now Epigenetics, the biology of belief.